Peter, Commissioner Füle engaged himself a lot in the Macedonian dossier. Does he leave the office a bit disappointed from Macedonia, having in mind that after 6 recommendations there is no progress in Macedonia?
I think Commissioner Füle was very clear when presenting the progress report on Macedonia that, it takes two to tango. The Commission has done what was in our powers. Commissioner himself was personally very much engaged in trying to work with the authorities and opposition in your country to make sure that the country delivers on the expectation of the population. And the expectation of the population is to move on the accession road with reforms. We know that there are two reasons why the progress report this year on Macedonia was not very positive, and we stated that there is impasse in the accession process. Firstly, because the Council was not able to act upon our 5 recommendations so far. That's one element, but the other element is that there was backsliding in many respects, in many areas on the reforms. And although Commissioner tried very hard, and one of the proofs is his engagement in achieving the March the 1st political agreement on ending the crisis, but we've seen 2 crises within short period of time in Macedonia, and the opposition walking out of the parliament. So there are things where the Commission can do only as much as we are allowed to do by the partners in the country. As long as the partners don't proceed on the reforms, as long as the partners are not using the democratic framework and democratic institutions for the dialogue, for the political dialogue and for advancing of the EU-related reforms, there is nothing the European Commission can do except trying to encourage the partner to make their best in order to overcome the current hurdles and current problems. So, shortly to your question, I think Commissioner Füle leaves the office and leaves the mandate after 5 years of trying and having done everything possible, everything what was at his disposal to try to help Macedonia to help itself. But in the end, it's up to the authorities, it's up to the decision makers in Macedonia to achieve the necessary breakthrough.
The progress report is an important tool of the European Commission to stimulate the reform processes. How do you explain this controversy that after 6 recommendations in a row to start the negotiation, instead of increasing the performance of Macedonia, there is an obvious decrease?
Well, first of all, progress report is a mirror for the country, what the country has done, how the country has moved, or where are the deficits. So the progress report is objective assessment of what has been done and what needs to be done. Where's the problem? The Commission has for 6th time now recommended the start of the accession negotiations because, we still think that despite all the problems in Macedonia, there is the necessary cumulative progress making it possible for us to make this recommendation. But as you know, in the end, it's up to the member states to find the consensus unanimously on following this recommendation and agreeing on the start of negotiations. Unfortunately, we all know that because of the lack of consensus, mainly because of the name issue with Greece, it was not possible to find such consensus. There's the competence of the member states, and European Commission, Commissioner Füle has stressed last year and since then several times that yes, the inability to start the negotiations and to continue with the reform process will affect the motivation in the country, will affect the mood in the country, will affect the determination of the people to go through the process of reforms, which is not easy. This process of reforms is sometimes painful and difficult, and for that people need to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And the light at the end of the tunnel for Macedonia is the perspective of EU membership, which was given to the country unanimously by all the member states, and it was repeated since. But unfortunately, the member states are not able to find consensus on following the recommendation from the European Commission.
But we are saying now Macedonia has a recommendation, but Macedonia is in impasse. Do you think that you are giving a space to the member states even to discuss the issue?
Yes, of course. The very fact that we repeated the recommendation is basically sending this message to the member states. Look, this is our recommendation. The recommendation is there for the 6th time. You have to deal with this recommendation. And part of our assessment on Macedonia is that there is an impasse, but this impasse is also due to the fact that Council until now did not act on our recommendation. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is also the backsliding and the current inner political situation in Macedonia. But still the recommendation is there, and the recommendation is basically our message to the Council. We are sending this to the Council. Progress report is the report from the Commission to the Council. So we are saying to the Member States, we are recommending opening the accession negotiations. Be aware of the risks. If you don't act on this recommendation, of the impact this can have, this stalling of the process can have on the reform resolve in the country, and we are starting to see it. And we said last year that we need to be aware also about the impact of this situation on the inter-ethnic relations in the country, because the EU perspective is one very strong glue for the people in the country to stick together and to work together.
When Commissioner said Macedonia can lose the European perspective if is not going to be resolutely dedicated to the reform processes, what do you mean by saying this? Means that Macedonia can lose the recommendation?
Well, what Commissioner said and what is written in the conclusions on Macedonia is that without continuing and without decisive action now, it will be very difficult in the future to repeat the recommendation. So this is a wake-up call, this is a warning. I mean, we said that there is a need to overcome this impact and there is a need for decisive action to overcome this impasse. And the decisive action means you have to stop and reverse the backsliding in some areas, the backsliding of the reforms, the backsliding of using the democratic institutions, the backsliding in upholding certain rights like media freedom and freedom of expression. And you need to mobilize all your efforts domestically to jumpstart the reforms again and to move them forward, not to allow them to backslide in many areas where we identified they are backsliding now. So it is important for the leaders in the country, for the political parties, for the stakeholders to make sure, to mobilize their forces, to make sure they do everything, they undertake decisive action to overcome this impasse in order not to lose the recommendation.
And once again, media is freedom of the media is a problem. In comparison with the last progress report, the last recommendation, how do you find the situation now? There is a kind of amelioration of the situation, or it's going worse?
Well, I mean, if you read the progress report, you don't read anything about dramatically improving situation. Let me quote from the progress report this year: the situation on media freedom continued to deteriorate. That's the answer.
Thank you.